Imagine building your entire life on a foundation of love, trust, and shared dreams. For 2 decades, you pour your heart into a relationship, believing it's an unbreakable bond, a sacred promise. You wake up every day next to the person you vowed to spend forever with, confident in the life you've meticulously built together. But what if, beneath that picture-perfect surface, lay a truth so devastating, so utterly cynical, that it could shatter everything you thought you knew? What if the vows whispered, the rings exchanged, the very essence of your union was a lie, a deliberate, calculated deception that kept you in the dark, vulnerable, and completely unprotected? This isn't just a story about a broken heart. It's about a betrayal so profound, it redefines the very meaning of love, trust, and identity. Stick around, because this is the chilling tale of a woman who discovered she was never legally married. And he knew it all along. The quiet hum of the old house was often the only sound, a silent witness to a life that felt both impossibly complete and subtly, unsettlingly empty. Sarah had always cherished this stillness, believing it to be the bedrock of her 20-year marriage to David. Their home, nestled amidst the sprawling, sun-drenched orchards of California, was a testament to their shared dreams. A rambling vintage farmhouse with wide verandas, a sprawling garden that burst with color, and the comforting scent of citrus blossoms carried on the breeze. It was a picture of idyllic domesticity, the kind people aspired to, the kind that whispered of enduring love and unbreakable bonds. Yet, beneath the surface of this tranquil existence, a tremor had begun, an almost imperceptible vibration that hinted at something deeply, fundamentally wrong. It started subtly, as these things often do. A misplaced document, a casual remark from an old friend about a past relationship David had mentioned before they met, a fleeting expression on his face when legal matters arose, small, disconnected anomalies that, individually, meant nothing. But cumulatively, they began to weave a tapestry of unease, a thread of doubt pulling at the fabric of Sarah's carefully constructed reality. She'd always been a woman of unwavering faith, a pragmatic soul who believed in the tangible, the observable. So, when these ethereal whispers of suspicion began to creep in, she dismissed them, attributing them to the anxieties of approaching middle age, the natural ebb and flow of a long-term partnership. After all, David was her rock, her confidant, the man who had promised her forever under a canopy of stars on that magical night 2 decades ago. Their meeting had been a whirlwind, a chance encounter at a local art gallery opening that felt ordained by fate. He was charismatic, with eyes that held a compelling mix of warmth and a subtle, almost melancholic depth. Sarah, a budding landscape architect then, had been captivated by his quiet intensity, his profound interest in her passions, and the way he made her feel seen, truly seen, for the first time. The courtship was brief, passionate, and filled with the heady rush of a love story unfolding. Within months, they were making plans, dreaming of a life together, a future painted in hues of shared joy and unwavering commitment. The wedding, a small, intimate affair at a picturesque vineyard, was everything she had ever dreamed of, or so she thought. She remembered the feel of the delicate lace of her gown, the scent of fresh roses, the tremor in David's hand as he slipped the ring onto her finger. She remembered the soft murmur of their vows, the solemn promise of "I do," echoing in the stillness of the afternoon. It was a day etched into her memory with the indelible ink of absolute certainty. But lately these memories felt blurry, not in their visual detail but in their emotional resonance. A nagging sensation, like a word on the tip of her tongue she couldn't quite grasp, began to plague her. Why had they chosen that particular vineyard, a place so remote and private? Why had David been so insistent on keeping the guest list minimal, citing their desire for intimacy? At the time, it had seemed romantic, perfectly aligned with her own quiet nature. Now, in the creeping shadows of her doubt, it felt orchestrated. One afternoon, while searching for an old photo album, Sarah stumbled upon a box tucked away in the back of David's rarely used study closet. It was an innocuous-looking box, labeled simply "Old Documents." Curiosity, a dangerous serpent, coiled in her gut. She knew David valued his privacy, but this felt different. A primal urge, a premonition, guided her hand. Inside, beneath layers of outdated tax returns and faded utility bills, she found it. Not a marriage certificate. Not the official, embossed document she remembered signing with trembling hands. Instead, there was a sheaf of papers, seemingly unrelated. But then her eyes landed on a single, stark page. It was a legal disclaimer, a waiver, for an event at the vineyard where they had married. It detailed the rental of the space, the catering, the officiant's fee. And then, a small, almost imperceptible line of text at the bottom, in an almost identical font to the rest of the document, stated, "This event is a symbolic ceremony only and does not constitute a legally binding marriage under the laws of the state of California." The words swam before her eyes, blurring into an incomprehensible tangle. Symbolic, not legally binding. The world tilted on its axis. The quiet hum of the house suddenly became a deafening roar, a cacophony of 1,000 unanswered questions screaming in her mind. Her breath hitched, her lungs seizing. This couldn't be right. It was a mistake, a clerical error, a cruel joke. She flipped through the other documents, desperate for proof, for anything to counteract the cold dread that was seeping into her bones. But there was nothing. No marriage certificate, no official record of their union anywhere in the box. Just this chilling, sterile disclaimer. The weight of it, the sheer, unimaginable magnitude of the lie, crushed her. 20 years. 20 years of a life built on a foundation of sand. A magnificent, beautiful illusion. Every tender touch, every shared laugh, every whispered secret, all of it suddenly tainted, imbued with a bitter irony. David, her husband, the man she loved, trusted, believed in implicitly. He knew. He must have known. The thought was a venomous bite, spreading its poison through her veins. He had known all along that she was never legally his wife, and the quiet, tranquil hum of their home, once a comfort, now felt like the mocking silence of a tomb. The disclaimer felt like a physical blow, leaving Sarah breathless, her mind reeling in a disorienting swirl of disbelief and cold, hard clarity. The idyllic landscape outside the study window, once a source of comfort, now seemed to mock her, its sun-drenched beauty a stark contrast to the sudden darkness that had descended upon her soul. She clutched the document, her knuckles white, the flimsy paper feeling like a heavy stone in her hand. Every memory, every shared moment with David, was now replayed through a distorted lens, each instance of his affection or tenderness reinterpreted as a carefully crafted performance. How could she have been so blind? So utterly, naively trusting? The questions hammered at her, relentless and unforgiving. She remembered instances where David had been oddly evasive about their legal status, shrugging off conversations about wills or joint accounts with vague assurances that everything was taken care of. At the time, she'd seen it as his typical laid-back approach to paperwork, an endearing quirk. Now it was a glaring red flag, a neon sign she had somehow missed for 2 decades. The small wedding, the lack of official paperwork at the time. It all clicked into place with a horrifying precision, like the tumblers of a lock falling perfectly into alignment, revealing a vault of devastating truth. Her first instinct was to confront him, to burst into the living room where he was likely reading his evening paper, and scream the words at him, demanding an explanation. But a colder, more calculating part of her held back. What good would that do? What if he denied it, twisted the truth further, or, worse yet, revealed an even more insidious layer to his deception? She needed to understand the full scope of this lie, to gather her thoughts, to prepare for a battle she never imagined she'd have to fight. Over the next few days, Sarah moved through their shared life like a ghost. She cooked, she cleaned, she smiled, she listened, all while a storm raged within her. David, oblivious, continued his routines, his calm demeanor an unbearable torment. He spoke of their future, of retirement plans, of renovations to the house, each word a fresh cut, a new layer of betrayal. She began to observe him, truly observe him, for the first time in years. His subtle gestures, The way his eyes sometimes held a flicker of something unreadable, the almost imperceptible pause before he answered certain questions. Everything that had once seemed familiar now felt alien, imbued with a sinister undertone. She started her own quiet investigation. A discreet search online for the officiant who had performed their ceremony yielded no results. The vineyard itself, charming and picturesque, was still in business, but a quick call confirmed they offered ceremonial packages that did not include legal marriage services. It was all a facade, a meticulously constructed illusion designed to ensnare her. The deeper she delved, the more tangled the web became, and the more terrifying the implications. If they weren't legally married, what did that mean for their shared assets? For her future? For her very identity, which had been so intrinsically tied to being David's wife? A gnawing fear began to set in, a chilling realization that if he could lie about something so fundamental, what else was he capable of? Was this about money, control, or something far more sinister? She remembered snippets of conversations with mutual friends, casual remarks about David's past that she had brushed aside. He had been vague about his family, saying they were estranged. He rarely spoke of his youth. It had seemed like a private matter, a painful history he preferred not to revisit. Now it felt like a deliberate erasure, a meticulous effort to leave no trace of his true self. One evening, as they sat on the veranda, the setting sun painting the sky in fiery hues, David spoke of a business deal, a substantial investment he was considering. "It's a big one, darling," he said, his hand resting casually on her knee. "But it promises a huge return. Our future is secured." Sarah's stomach clenched. Our future? What future did she have with a man who had built their entire life on a monumental lie? The thought of him controlling their assets, perhaps even her own inheritance, now seemed horrifyingly plausible. He spoke of their joint accounts, of their shared legacy, as if they were indeed a legally bound unit. The hypocrisy was suffocating. She began to feel like a detective in her own life, sifting through fragments of evidence, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed designed to mislead. She secretly contacted a lawyer, a distant acquaintance, under the guise of seeking general information about property law. The lawyer's casual confirmation that property acquired during a cohabiting relationship could be far more complicated to divide without a legal marriage made the knot in her stomach tighten further. Sarah realized the full extent of her vulnerability, how completely exposed she was. David had ensured that she had no legal standing, no protection, no claim to the life they had ostensibly built together. The initial shock began to give way to a simmering rage, a quiet but potent fury that solidified her resolve. She would not be a victim. She would not let this man, this master manipulator, continue to define her reality. The game had changed. The rules were no longer what she believed them to be. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, ominous shadows across the orchard, Sarah knew, with chilling certainty, that the true battle was just beginning. The whispers of doubt had now become a deafening roar, urging her to uncover every last secret, no matter how devastating. The silence between Sarah and David became a tangible thing, a heavy blanket woven with unspoken accusations and concealed truths. Sarah, now fully immersed in her clandestine investigation, moved with a newfound stealth, her once open and trusting demeanor replaced by a steely resolve. Every interaction with David was a performance, a carefully constructed facade of normalcy designed to keep him unsuspecting. She observed his habits, his phone calls, the documents he left casually on his desk, her senses heightened by the raw wound of betrayal. Her inquiries had led her down a rabbit hole of shocking discoveries. The first major crack in David's carefully constructed persona came when she discreetly approached an old friend of his from his early 20s. Someone he rarely mentioned. After a hesitant conversation, peppered with subtle probing, the friend let slip a name, Eleanor. David had been married to Eleanor, legally married, for several years before meeting Sarah. The marriage had ended acrimoniously, with Eleanor reportedly leaving him for another man, taking a significant portion of his assets. The friend had assumed David had learned his lesson about tying the knot. The revelation was a hammer blow. Not only had he lied about their marriage, but he had a prior legal marriage he had painstakingly concealed. The pieces began to fall into place with sickening clarity. His insistence on a symbolic ceremony, his evasiveness about legal documents, his constant reassurances about their shared future, it was all a meticulously planned strategy to protect himself, to ensure he would never again be vulnerable to the financial repercussions of a legal divorce. Sarah wasn't a wife. She was a live-in partner, a convenient arrangement, a facade for his public image. The depth of his cynicism, the calculated coldness of his deception, was breathtaking. But there was more. Driven by a desperate need for absolute certainty, Sarah delved deeper into public records, a labyrinthine process that required patience and a healthy dose of technological savvy she didn't know she possessed. What she unearthed was even more chilling. David's financial dealings were far more complex and precarious than he ever let on. He had amassed significant debts from failed investments, a fact he cleverly disguised by cycling money through various shell companies and offshore accounts. Their beautiful home, the very symbol of their shared life, was heavily mortgaged, and he had taken out multiple lines of credit against its equity, all unbeknownst to her. The promise of secured future was a cruel joke. He was not securing their future. He was systematically draining their resources, potentially leaving her with nothing but a mountain of debt. The culmination of her investigation came one rainy afternoon. She found a hidden compartment in David's old desk, a place he must have thought utterly secure. Inside, nestled beneath a false bottom, was a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, but a ledger, a meticulous record of his financial transactions, his debts, his assets, and with a jolt of horror, a timeline of his relationship with Sarah. Entries coldly detailed his projections for their shared expenses, his plans for consolidating loans, and most damningly, a chilling entry that read, "Sarah, excellent cover. Stable, trusting. No legal ties. No risk." The words seared themselves into her mind. No legal ties. No risk. It was a confession, a brutal acknowledgement of his deliberate cruelty. He had seen her not as a partner, not as a love, but as an asset, a tool to maintain an image of stability while he spiraled into financial ruin. The journal also contained veiled references to other women, fleeting encounters, further eroding any remaining shred of affection or respect she had for him. He was a predator, a chameleon, adapting his persona to suit his needs, leaving a trail of emotional wreckage in his wake. The confrontation, when it finally came, was not the explosion Sarah had once imagined. It was a cold, precise surgical strike. She waited until he returned from a golf game, relaxed and unsuspecting. As he walked into the living room, she stood by the fireplace, the symbolic ceremony waiver, the Eleanor marriage certificate, and the damning journal spread out on the coffee table. Her voice, though trembling, was clear and steady. "David," she began, "we need to talk about our marriage." His eyes widened, then narrowed. The easy smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of fear, then a hardening resolve. He saw the documents, recognized the journal. The color drained from his face. "Sarah," he stammered. "What is this?" "This," she said, her voice rising with a quiet intensity, "is the truth you've spent 20 years hiding, the truth about Eleanor, the truth about our marriage, and the truth about your finances." She picked up the journal, opening it to the page with his chilling entry. "No legal ties, no risk. Is that what I was to you, David? Just a cover? A convenient lack of risk?" The air crackled with unspoken tension. David's face contorted, a mask of anger and desperation. "You have no idea what you're talking about, Sarah?" he snarled, moving towards the table as if to sweep the evidence away. But Sarah stood her ground. "Oh, I think I do. I know everything. I know you were never legally divorced from Eleanor when you married me. I know you manipulated me, exploited my trust, and built our entire life on a foundation of lies to protect your own precarious financial situation. You stripped me of my legal rights, my security, my dignity. You knew it all along, didn't you?" The finality in her voice, the undeniable proof laid bare, left him no room to maneuver. His eyes, once so warm and captivating, now held only a desperate, cornered malice. The truth, raw and unvarnished, hung in the air, a devastating silence broken only by the rapid thumping of Sarah's own bruised and shattered heart. The life they had built together, the beautiful illusion, shattered into a million irreparable pieces around them. The reckoning had begun. The silence that followed Sarah's stark indictment was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic drumming of her own heart. David stood frozen, his face a kaleidoscope of emotions. Initial shock, then fleeting panic, quickly replaced by a cold, calculating anger. He knew he was caught, the elaborate tapestry of his deception irrevocably unraveled. There was no more pretense, no more charm. The man standing before her now was a stranger, a bare, raw embodiment of betrayal. "You think you know everything?" David finally sneered, his voice laced with venom. "You think you understand the complexities of life, the things a man has to do to survive?" He gestured wildly at the documents, his eyes gleaming with a twisted self-pity. "Eleanor took everything. She left me a hollowed-out shell. I swore I'd never let that happen again. You were a fresh start, a chance to rebuild without the same risks." His words, meant to be a justification, only solidified Sarah's resolve. He wasn't remorseful. He was resentful, bitter, blaming her for uncovering his elaborate charade. "Rebuild at my expense?" Sarah retorted, her voice steady despite the searing pain. "By denying me my legal rights, by making me believe in a marriage that never existed, by potentially leaving me with nothing." The sheer audacity of his self-pity, his inability to see the devastation he had wrought, was a final, sickening blow. The confrontation was swift and brutal, devoid of the dramatic outbursts she might once have expected. Sarah, fueled by a righteous anger and a profound sense of self-preservation, laid out her intentions with chilling clarity. She would expose him. She would seek legal counsel, even without a marriage certificate, to claim her share of the assets they had accumulated during 2 decades of cohabitation, to hold him accountable for his deceit. She would rebuild her life, but this time, it would be on her own terms, free from his insidious lies. David, seeing the unyielding resolve in her eyes, knowing his carefully constructed world was crumbling, finally buckled. The bravado evaporated, replaced by a desperate, pathetic plea for secrecy, for a quiet dissolution, to avoid public scandal. But Sarah had moved beyond compassion. The betrayal had carved too deep a wound. The ensuing weeks were a blur of legal consultations, financial investigations, and emotionally draining confrontations. Sarah learned the true extent of David's financial recklessness, the tangled web of debts, the precarious nature of his investments. The fight for her share of the life she had built was arduous, a legal battle where the lack of a marriage certificate made her position vulnerable, but not entirely hopeless. She fought with a ferocity she never knew she possessed, driven by the memory of every lie, every stolen moment of genuine trust. It became clear that legally proving a common-law marriage in a state that didn't recognize it was an uphill battle. However, her lawyer, armed with David's journal entries, the symbolic ceremony waiver, and witness testimonies of their long-standing cohabitation and shared life, built a compelling case for a constructive trust, arguing that David had unjustly enriched himself at Sarah's expense. The threat of public exposure, of David's carefully crafted reputation being shattered, hung heavy in the air. Facing mounting legal pressure and the undeniable evidence of his deceit, David eventually agreed to a settlement, albeit a painful and far from equitable one for Sarah. It was a bitter victory, but a victory nonetheless. The old farmhouse, once a sanctuary, became a monument to a shattered dream. Sarah sold it, severing the last tangible link to the lie. She moved to a smaller, more modern home, shedding the vestiges of a past that was not what it seemed. The process was agonizing, a forced reinvention of her entire existence. There were days when the grief was overwhelming, when the sheer weight of the betrayal threatened to crush her. But with each small step, each decision made independently, she felt a flicker of something new within her, a nascent strength, a rediscovered sense of self. She started her landscape architecture business anew, pouring her energy into creating beauty and order out of chaos, a metaphor for her own life. She reconnected with old friends, forging new relationships built on honesty and genuine connection. The scars remained, a constant reminder of the profound cost of blind trust. But they were also badges of resilience, testaments to a woman who had faced a devastating truth and refused to be defined by it. The story of Sarah and David became a cautionary tale among their circles, a whispered narrative of a man who built a life on deception and the woman who ultimately unmasked him. For Sarah, the conclusion was not one of triumphant joy, but of a quiet, hard-won peace. She had learned the painful lesson that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, shadows can lurk, and that sometimes the most dangerous secrets are those held closest to the heart. She was never legally married, and he knew it all along. The words echoed in her mind, not as a lament, but as a chilling reminder of the fragility of trust and the enduring power of truth, however brutal. And as she looked out at the nascent garden she was cultivating, a garden born of resilience and renewal, Sarah knew that her future, though unwritten, would be authentically, unequivocally her own. The past, with all its heartbreak, had paradoxically set her free. The story of Sarah and David reminds us that some wounds run deeper than we can ever imagine, and that the masks people wear can be meticulously crafted, designed to hide the most chilling truths. Sarah's journey was one of devastating discovery, but also of incredible strength, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to rebuild even after the most profound betrayals. Her life, once defined by a monumental lie, is now being forged anew, on her own terms, fiercely independent and irrevocably changed. It leaves us to ponder, how well do we truly know the people closest to us? And how do we find the courage to face the most uncomfortable truths, even when they threaten to unravel our entire world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explore the hidden depths of human relationships.